The sun hung low over the vast Texas horizon, casting a golden glow across the sprawling Walker Ranch. It was an evening like any other, or so it seemed, when a female rancher set out to move cattle on her family's rugged property. For her, it was a routine task, one she'd done countless times before, the rhythm of ranch life as familiar as her own heartbeat. But this time, she never returned home. For 9 long years, her disappearance remained an enigma, a haunting void with no trace of her or her pickup truck. Her family was left with nothing but questions, their hope dwindling with each passing season. Then one fateful day, an oil drilling crew working in the desolate desert struck something metallic buried deep beneath the earth. When they hauled it to the surface, it shattered the silence of a mystery that had tormented her family for nearly a decade. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the Walker Ranch, painting long shadows across the dusty Texas landscape. Thomas Walker, his weathered hands stained with motor oil, hunched over the engine of his old John Deere tractor in the equipment shed. At 62, he'd learned to handle most of the maintenance himself. It saved money and kept him occupied. The ranch had grown quieter these past 9 years, ever since his daughter Savannah vanished. He was tightening a belt when the distinctive crunch of tires on gravel broke his focus. Peering through the shed's open door, he spotted a police patrol car kicking up dust as it rolled toward the main house. Thomas grabbed a rag from his back pocket, wiping the grease from his hands as best he could. It had been a while since law enforcement had come calling about Savannah's case. The first year, they'd been regular visitors, their questions and searches a constant presence. By year 3, the visits had stopped entirely. Thomas stepped out to meet them, squinting against the glaring alpine sun. 2 officers emerged from the patrol car. One he recognized as Deputy Martinez, the other a younger officer he didn't know. "Afternoon, officers," Thomas called out, still working, the rag between his fingers. "What brings you out here?" Deputy Martinez removed his hat, a gesture that instantly put Thomas on edge. That was never a good sign. "Mr. Walker, we need to talk to you. We found something." "Something?" Thomas felt his chest tighten. "We believe we found the truck. Your daughter was using the night she disappeared." Thomas let out a short, sarcastic laugh. "After 9 years? Where'd you find it? At the bottom of the Rio Grande?" The officers exchanged glances, and Martinez's expression remained deadly serious. "No, sir. It was buried deep in the ground out in the desert, just outside Terlingua ghost town." "Buried?" Thomas shook his head, disbelief washing over him. "That sounds impossible. You're telling me someone buried a whole truck? An oil drilling crew found it?" The younger officer stepped forward. "They were setting up a new drilling station at an old site. When they started drilling, they hit metal. Turned out to be your daughter's truck." Thomas stared at them, the rag slipping from his hands. The absurdity of it was overwhelming, but the officer's expressions told him this was no joke. "I can hardly believe that nonsense," he muttered, his voice losing its edge. "We need you to come with us, Mr. Walker," Martinez said gently. "We need you to identify the truck. Confirm it's the one Savannah was driving. It's evidence." "Now?" Thomas nodded slowly, his mind racing. "Let me secure things here." He turned and called out to Manuel, his ranch foreman, who'd been working in a nearby pasture. "Manuel, I need you to watch the place. I've got to go with these officers." Manuel jogged over, concern etching his face as he took in the scene. "Everything okay, boss?" "They found Savannah's truck," Thomas said quietly. "I'll be back when I can." Thomas climbed into the back of the patrol car, his thoughts a whirlwind of questions. The drive to the site took about an hour and a half, winding through the sparse desert landscape he knew like the back of his hand. As they approached Terlingua, he could see activity from a distance. Multiple vehicles, including state police, clustered around what looked like a drilling operation. When they arrived at the desert site, Thomas was struck by the organized chaos. Authorities and oil workers crowded the area, yellow tape sectioning off a perimeter. At the center of it all sat a pickup truck, rust-stained and caked in dirt, suspended by heavy chains from a crane. Behind it gaped a massive hole where the drilling equipment had broken through. Thomas stepped out of the patrol car, his legs unsteady on the sandy ground. A man in a suit approached, Detective Rodriguez from the state police, who'd worked Savannah's case in the early days. "Mr. Walker," Rodriguez said, extending his hand. "I'm sorry we're meeting again under these circumstances." "Detective," Thomas replied, shaking his hand. His eyes fixed on the truck, Rodriguez guided him toward a heavy-set man in an oil company hard hat. "This is Jim Patterson from Permian Drilling." "Jim, tell Mr. Walker what you told us." Patterson cleared his throat. "Well, sir, this location was marked in our surveys as a disused drilling site from the 1960s. When my crew arrived this morning, we noticed a large boulder sitting on top of where the old wellhead should have been. That seemed strange. Usually, old wells are just capped and marked, not covered with boulders." Thomas nodded, trying to focus on the man's words while his gaze kept drifting to the truck. "We moved the boulder and ran our standard ground penetration tests." Patterson continued, "But the old equipment must have interfered with our readings because we didn't detect anything unusual. Started drilling to reopen the well, and about 15 feet down, we hit something that wasn't rock or soil. The drill operator knew right away something was wrong." "So you dug it out?" Thomas asked. "Had to. Our detectors couldn't figure out what we'd hit. Took us 3 hours with the excavator to carefully uncover it. Soon as we saw it was a vehicle, we called the authorities. I mean, why would anyone dump a truck in an oil well unless they were trying to hide something?" Thomas moved closer to the truck. Despite 9 years underground, it was remarkably intact. The desert's dry conditions had preserved it better than he'd expected, though rust had claimed parts of the undercarriage and wheel wells. The front windshield was shattered where the drill had punched through. "Someone dumped this here deliberately," Thomas said, his voice tight. "This isn't anywhere near Savannah's usual route. She wouldn't have driven herself near an oil well." Detective Rodriguez nodded. "We found no human remains in or around the vehicle, but yes, this appears to be a crime scene. Someone went to considerable effort to hide this truck." "Can I see what was inside?" Thomas asked. Rodriguez led him to a makeshift tent set up nearby. Under the harsh light of portable lamps, a folding table displayed evidence bags, each meticulously labeled and photographed. Thomas's breath caught as he recognized Savannah's possessions: her leather wallet with the turquoise snap, a hair tie with strands of her dark hair still wound through it, her small silver cross necklace that had belonged to her mother. "These are hers," Thomas confirmed, his voice rough. He pointed to a multi-tool. "That's mine. I gave it to her for emergencies." His finger moved to a tire pressure gauge. "That's mine too. Told her to keep it in the truck." A commotion near the site entrance drew their attention. Sheriff Clayton Ridge's SUV pulled up, dust swirling around it. The sheriff emerged, adjusting his hat as he surveyed the scene. Detective Rodriguez and Thomas walked over to meet him. "Sorry I'm late," the sheriff said, slightly out of breath. "Got held up at a traffic accident out on Highway 118, 3-car pileup. Had to wait for the state troopers to arrive and take over." "It's okay," Rodriguez said. Sheriff Ridge turned to Thomas, his expression softening. "Thomas, I'm real sorry about all this. I know we searched for 9 years, and to finally find something like this. It's good we found the truck," Thomas said carefully. "But my daughter's still missing. We don't know if she's alive or dead, if she's safe or suffering. This truck doesn't explain anything. What about DNA samples?" Thomas asked Rodriguez. "Maybe there's something that could tell us what happened." "Forensics has collected everything they could find," Rodriguez assured him. "Hair fibers, Possible blood samples from the seats, fingerprints if any survived. It'll take a few days at minimum to process everything at the lab. The oil company supervisor, Patterson, approached the sheriff. Sheriff Ridge, can we resume operations in the surrounding area? We've got contracts to fulfill. No, the sheriff said firmly. This is a crime scene now. I'm expanding the perimeter. We'll have an excavation team go over the nearby area, see if there's anything else buried out here. Rodriguez checked his phone. I need to head back to the station, review the case files again with this new evidence. I'll drive Thomas home, Sheriff Ridge offered. There's something I need to discuss with him anyway. Thomas looked between the two men, then nodded. He followed the sheriff to his SUV, taking one last look at the truck that had been hidden for 9 years. The drive back to the ranch was quiet, Sheriff Ridge keeping his eyes on the road while Thomas stared out at the familiar landscape. When they pulled up to the main house, the sheriff cut the engine and turned to Thomas. Mind if we talk in your office? I need to go over some things with you. Thomas nodded, leading the way through the house to his small office at the back. The room was simple, a desk covered in ranch paperwork, a filing cabinet, 2 chairs, and walls lined with photos of cattle shows. One prominent picture stood out: Savannah, on her horse, taken just months before she disappeared. The sheriff settled into the chair across from the desk, pulling out a small notebook. He clicked his pen a few times before speaking. Thomas, I need you to walk me through that night again. I know it's been a long time. The case went cold in the 3rd year, but with this new evidence, we need to revisit everything. Thomas leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped in front of him. I've told this story 100 times, Clayton. I know, but tell me again. Thomas took a deep breath. Savannah was moving cattle that evening, like she often did. She usually left the ranch around 8 p.m. with her truck. The drive from here to the west grazing land takes about 45 minutes. She liked working in the late evening to avoid competition with the neighboring ranch. They sometimes used the same water access points, and she preferred to avoid any conflicts. The sheriff scribbled notes. Go on. I was here finishing paperwork when she hadn't returned by 11 o'clock. I went to look for her. It was already dark. I found the cattle still in the grazing area, but there was no sign of Savannah or the truck. I wasn't too worried at first. Thomas's voice grew quieter. She was 28 years old, Clayton, an independent woman who knew this land better than most. I figured maybe she'd had truck trouble and gotten a ride with someone or decided to camp out there for the night. She'd done it before, but she didn't come back. When I woke up the next morning and she still wasn't here, that's when I called you folks. Thomas's jaw tightened. I've lived with that guilt ever since. If I'd called that night instead of waiting until morning, maybe whatever happened to her could have been prevented. Sheriff Ridge made more notes, then looked up with an expression Thomas couldn't quite read. You said you went to bed. What time was that? Around midnight, after I got back from checking the grazing land. And you were alone here. Manuel and the other hands had gone home. They don't live on the property. The sheriff leaned forward. Thomas, where exactly were you between 8 p.m. and when you went to look for her? Thomas frowned. I told you I was here in this office. Can anyone verify that? What? Thomas straightened in his chair. Why would anyone need to verify that? What time exactly did you go looking for her? And why weren't you worried enough to search more thoroughly or call us immediately? The questions came faster now, the sheriff's tone shifting from conversational to interrogatory. Thomas felt heat rising in his neck. Clayton, what the hell is this about? You're missing the point entirely. I didn't kidnap my own daughter. Why would I do that? I didn't say you kidnapped her, the sheriff replied calmly. But we have to explore all possibilities. These kinds of cases, sometimes family members are involved. You're wasting your time if you think I did this, Thomas said. his voice hard now. "I was here from 8 p.m. until 11 p.m. working on ranch accounts. Then I drove out to the grazing land, spent about an hour looking around, and came back. And even if I'd wanted to, which is insane, I'm 62 years old. You think I could bury a truck under tons of desert sand in one night without anyone noticing, without leaving tracks? Without being seen?" The sheriff made more notes. "What about your ranch staff? Where were they that night?" Thomas slammed his hand on the desk. "Now you're suspecting my whole damn ranch. Manuel's been with me for 20 years. The other hands are good men. I'd like to question them again. With all due respect, Sheriff, I don't respect what you're doing. Right now. You're wasting time that should be directed at real leads." Thomas leaned forward. "You want to do something useful? Pull the traffic CCTV footage from around Terlingua and the nearest towns from that night. Look for heavy trucks, excavation equipment, something that could move enough dirt to bury a pickup." Sheriff Ridge shook his head. "At this phase, that's not necessary, and we'll need to coordinate with the Terlingua department. I know how to do my job, Thomas." "Do you?" Thomas stood up. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're more interested in pointing fingers at me than finding out who actually buried that truck." The sheriff stood as well, closing his notebook. "I'm following procedure. Then follow it somewhere else. Check those traffic cameras. Talk to the oil company about who knew that well was there. Do some actual investigating." Thomas moved toward the door. "We're done here. If you want to talk to me again, it'll be at the station with Detective Rodriguez present." He walked the sheriff out of the house and watched as he got into his SUV. They didn't shake hands or exchange pleasantries. The sheriff's tires kicked up dust as he drove away, leaving Thomas standing on his porch, fists clenched at his sides. The man who was supposed to be helping find his daughter had just treated him like a suspect. After 9 years of nothing, they finally had a real lead, and Clayton Ridge wanted to waste time interrogating him instead of following it. After the sheriff's SUV vanished down the ranch road, Thomas lingered on his porch, trying to quell the anger burning in his chest. He glanced at the clock visible through the window. 4 p.m. The afternoon heat was oppressive, and his throat was parched after all that talking. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since breakfast. He walked over to the equipment shed where Manuel was organizing tools. "I'm heading out for a bit," Thomas called out. "You guys know what needs doing." Manuel looked up, concern creasing his brow. "You okay, boss? Just need to clear my head. I'll be back later." Thomas climbed into his pickup and headed toward town. As he drove, he let out a sarcastic laugh, thinking about the sheriff's suggestion that his ranch hands might have helped him bury Savannah's truck. The absurdity of it reignited his anger. The Dusty Spur Tavern sat just off the main road, 15 minutes from the ranch. It was a local institution, opening at 4 p.m. sharp for the ranchers and oil workers getting off their shifts. Thomas pulled into the gravel parking lot, noting only a handful of vehicles there at this early hour. Inside, the air conditioning offered blessed relief. He took a seat at the bar, facing Jake, the bartender who'd been pouring drinks here. For as long as anyone could remember, whiskey neat in whatever sandwich you got ready, Thomas said. Jake nodded and glanced up at the TV mounted in the corner. The local news was showing footage of the drilling site, the truck being lifted from the hole. "Tom, I saw the news." "Is that really?" "Please don't ask," Thomas cut him off. "I've got enough headache. Just came here to calm down." Jake raised his hands in understanding and reached for the remote, changing the channel to a sports recap. "Hey," a voice called from a back table. "Why'd you change it? I was watching that." "Sorry about that," Jake said to Thomas quietly. Looking embarrassed, the man who'd complained got up and moved to the bar, taking a seat one stool over from Thomas. He was younger, maybe mid-40s, with the look of someone who'd driven a long way. He kept glancing at the now changed TV with obvious frustration. Thomas studied him while sipping his whiskey. The man was clearly invested in the news story, which seemed odd for a stranger. After a moment, Thomas decided to break the ice. "You from around here?" "Don't think I've seen you before." The man turned, seeming grateful for the conversation. "No, just got in. Drove down from New Mexico." He extended his hand. "Barry Granger." Thomas shook it. "Thomas Walker. What brings you to Alpine?" "Looking for my brother, actually, Terry Granger. He's a police officer here, or was anyway." Thomas nearly choked on his drink. "Terry Granger from traffic enforcement. That's him. You know Terry?" Barry's face lit up with hope. "We worked together on a case years ago." Thomas gestured vaguely toward the TV. "That truck they found, it belonged to me. My daughter was driving it when she disappeared." Barry's expression crumbled. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. No wonder Jake changed the channel." Thomas waved off the apology. "It's fine. But why are you here alone? Where's Terry?" "That's just it. I can't find him." Barry's frustration was evident. "I've been in Alpine for 2 days. Went to the police department, but they told me Terry quit 9 years ago. Nobody seems to know where he went." 9 years ago? Thomas frowned, thinking back. "Just like my daughter in that damn truck. Wait, now that you mention it, I remember someone telling me Terry moved to Mexico." "Mexico?" Barry looked stunned. "He never told me. Why would he just leave without saying anything?" They sat in silence for a moment, Thomas processing this information. Terry had been one of the officers working traffic enforcement during the initial investigation. He'd been helpful, pulling camera footage from the highways. "Did Terry ever mention anything to you about my daughter's case?" Thomas asked. Barry shook his head. "We weren't that close, actually. Barely talked after our parents died. We didn't part on good terms." He stared at his beer. "My life was pretty messed up back then, but I'm pulling it together now. Wanted to reconnect with him, except nobody knows where he is." "Someone at the station must know something," Thomas said. "I know a lot of the staff there. Detective Rodriguez has been working with me. He'd surely know if Terry really relocated to Mexico. I appreciate that, but you've got your own problems. I shouldn't burden you with mine. It's not a big deal." Thomas finished his whiskey as the news switched to weather. "Look, you need help finding your brother. And I need to talk to the detective anyway after my run-in with the sheriff." Jake brought the check, but Barry grabbed it before Thomas could reach for his wallet. "Least I can do," Barry said. "Thanks." Thomas stood. "You got a vehicle?" "No, took a cab from my motel." "Come with me then. The station's not far from here. We'll see what the detective knows about Terry." Barry's relief was palpable. "Thank you, really." They left the bar together, stepping out into the sweltering late afternoon heat. As Thomas unlocked his truck, a nagging feeling tugged at him. Terry's abrupt departure that same year, so soon after Savannah vanished, felt like more than just a coincidence. The Alpine police station was a modest brick building that had served the community since the 1970s. Thomas pulled into the visitor parking area, noting how much busier it seemed than during his morning visit to the drilling site when he'd driven past the department. He and Barry walked through the glass doors into the lobby. The front desk was staffed by Officer Patricia Hernandez, whom Thomas had known since she was a rookie. She looked up from her computer with a professional smile that faltered slightly. When she recognized him, "Mr. Walker, back again today." "Patricia, I need to see Detective Rodriguez." "Is he in?" She glanced at her computer screen. "Actually, he stepped out about an hour ago, but I can contact him if you need to speak with him urgently." Thomas gestured to Barry. "This is Barry Granger. He's looking for his brother, Officer Terry Granger. I'm trying to help him out." Patricia's expression shifted to recognition as she looked at Barry. "Oh yes, Mr. Granger, you came by yesterday asking about Officer Granger." She spoke with rehearsed patience. "As I told you then, we don't have any forwarding information for him. He left the department 9 years ago." "I know," Barry said, "but I was hoping maybe someone could tell me more about when he quit, where he moved to." Patricia shook her head sympathetically. "The only people who might have that information would be Detective Rodriguez or Sheriff Ridge. They were here when Officer Granger left." Thomas felt his jaw tighten at the mention of the sheriff, remembering their heated exchange just hours earlier. Still, he had to ask, is the sheriff in his office? "He hasn't returned yet, but he should be here any minute. He usually doesn't stay away from the station for too long, especially with everything going on today." Barry touched Thomas's arm. "Look, you've troubled yourself enough on my account. Let's go. I'll handle this on my own somehow." But Patricia was already pointing through the window. "Actually, that's him pulling in now. Told you he wouldn't be long." Thomas and Barry moved toward the door to intercept the sheriff. Through the glass, they watched as Sheriff Ridge's SUV pulled into a spot just a few spaces down from Thomas's truck. They stepped outside into the afternoon heat, expecting the sheriff to emerge immediately. But he didn't. They could see the sheriff's silhouette through the tinted windows, apparently on a phone call. They stood awkwardly by the station entrance, waiting. "Maybe we should wait inside," Barry suggested after a minute had passed. "I need to grab something from my truck anyway," Thomas said. "My phone charger. Battery's been dying all day with all these calls." He walked across the parking lot, fishing his keys from his pocket. The sheriff's SUV was parked with its windows cracked for ventilation, and as Thomas passed behind it, he could hear the sheriff's voice carrying on the warm air. He tried not to eavesdrop, but the words were clear in the quiet parking lot. "Handle it quickly," the sheriff was saying. "Bones? Yes, fine bones." Thomas fumbled with his keys, trying to focus on his own business. The sheriff was probably discussing another case. The man had a whole county to manage after all. "No, I'm not leaving town." "Okay, fine." The voice from the car's speaker system was harder to make out, just a tinny male voice responding to the sheriff. Thomas felt a pang of embarrassment for the sheriff. The man probably didn't realize how well sound carried from his vehicle. He'd have to mention it discreetly later. For privacy's sake, Thomas opened his truck door and reached for the phone charger in the center console. He was about to head back when more words drifted from the sheriff's vehicle. "Not Terry Granger. No one cares. Don't worry. New guy in the office. Yes." Thomas froze, his hand still on his truck door. Terry Granger? Why was the sheriff discussing Barry's missing brother? The sheriff's engine suddenly roared to life. Thomas looked up to see the SUV backing out of its spot. Barry was jogging toward him from the station entrance. Is that really the sheriff? He's leaving. Again. Thomas's mind raced, the sheriff discussing Bones, telling someone to handle something quickly, and then Terry Granger's name. None of it sat right. "Get in the car," Thomas said urgently. "What? Why? I think I overheard something I wasn't supposed to." "Just get in." Barry didn't argue further. They both climbed into Thomas's truck, and he started the engine, pulling out of the parking lot just as the sheriff's SUV turned onto the main road. "What did you hear?" Barry asked as they followed at a distance. "Your brother's name," Thomas said, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "The sheriff was talking about Terry Granger, said no one cares about him." Barry's face went pale. "What else?" "Something about Bones and handling something quickly." "Barry, I don't like this. Your brother vanished around the same time my daughter did. The sheriff showed up at my house accusing me of kidnapping my own kid, and now he's having secret conversations about your brother. Something's not right." They drove in tense silence, both men processing the implications of what Thomas had overheard. Thomas kept a careful distance behind the sheriff's SUV, trying to blend in with the sparse evening traffic. The sheriff was pushing the speed limit, weaving through the few cars on the road with an urgency that made Thomas's suspicions grow stronger. He's driving like he's late for something important, Barry observed, gripping the door handle. As Thomas accelerated to keep pace, or trying to get somewhere before someone else does, Thomas muttered. "I'm going to try calling him," he said, pulling out his phone while keeping one hand on the wheel. Maybe there's an explanation. He found the sheriff's number and dialed. Through the distance between their vehicles, he could see. The sheriff's hand moved to his phone, glanced at it, then set it aside. The call went to voicemail. "He's ignoring me," Thomas said as they crested a small hill. He could see the sheriff was still on his phone call, one hand gesturing. As he spoke, "Try the detective," Barry suggested. Thomas hit Rodriguez's number, switching to speaker as the call connected. "Thomas," the detective answered. "I assume you're calling about the drilling site." "We're processing the evidence as fast as no, Thomas interrupted. "Actually, I need to ask you about something else. Do you remember Officer Terry Granger?" There was a long pause. When Rodriguez spoke again, his voice was careful. "Terry Granger?" "Yes, I remember him. He moved to Mexico about 8 years ago." It was quite sudden. Barry leaned toward the phone. "Detective Rodriguez, this is Barry Granger, Terry's brother. I came here looking for him. Everyone keeps saying he went to Mexico, but that doesn't make sense. I'm sorry, Mr. Granger, but that's what we were told. He said he wanted to find a different passion, try something new." "No way," Barry said firmly. Terry loved being a cop. He was so proud of that badge. Used to say he'd take the job to his grave. "Why is this important right now?" Rodriguez asked. Thomas explained his confrontation with the sheriff. That afternoon, the strange accusations, and what he'd overheard in the parking lot. "We're following him now." "Something's not right here, Detective." "You're following Sheriff Ridge?" "Thomas, that's not a good idea. You should—" "He's turning," Barry interrupted. They watched as the sheriff's SUV slowed and turned onto a dirt road leading to what looked like an old farmhouse, barely visible in the gathering dusk. "Detective, I'll call you back," Thomas said, ending the call. He slowed the truck, looking for a place to pull off. About 100 yards past the farmhouse entrance, he found a cluster of mesquite trees that provided cover. He killed the engine and lights. "What are we doing?" Barry whispered. "Watching," Thomas replied. "Something's happening here." Through the deepening twilight, they could see the farmhouse more clearly now. It was run down, but not abandoned. Lights glowed in the windows, and vehicles were parked outside. The sheriff's SUV had stopped halfway up the drive, and another car was approaching from the opposite direction. "Look," Barry pointed. Several men got out of the newly arrived car. Thomas counted 3, maybe 4 figures in the dim light. They moved to the back seat of their vehicle and pulled someone out. Even from their distance, it was clear the person was bound. Their movements were restricted, stumbling as they were dragged between the men. "Jesus," Barry breathed. "Is that person blindfolded?" Thomas squinted, wishing he had binoculars. The figures moved to the sheriff's SUV, and with growing horror, they watched as the bound person was loaded into the trunk. The sheriff never even got out of his vehicle. "What the hell is going on?" Barry's voice was shaky. They watched as the sheriff's SUV pulled away from the farmhouse, continuing down the road in the direction they'd been heading. The other car turned around and headed back toward town. "Call Rodriguez now," Thomas said. Barry was already dialing. When the detective answered, Thomas grabbed the phone. "Detective, we just witnessed Sheriff Ridge receive what appears to be a kidnapped person. They loaded someone bound and blindfolded into his trunk at an old farmhouse off Highway 67. Thomas, that's a serious accusation. Are you absolutely certain about what you saw?" "Two eyes can be wrong," Thomas sighed grimly. But 4 eyes won't miss that kind of detail. Barry saw it too. Barry nodded vigorously, though the detective couldn't see him, confirmed. Someone was transferred from one vehicle to the sheriff's. They were definitely restrained. Rodriguez's voice became all business. If what you're saying is true, I'll have to issue a bolo immediately. All units will be alerted to stop the sheriff's vehicle. Do it, Thomas said. I'm dispatching units to your location now. If the sheriff is taking that road, he's heading for one of the few exits out of Alpine. We can set up roadblocks. Can you do this discreetly? Thomas asked. So he won't know it's coming? That depends on how many loyal men he has at dispatch, but it doesn't matter. The bolo will ensure he's stopped. I'll handle this personally. Rodriguez paused. Thomas Barry, it's getting dark. You should turn back now. Let us handle this. Thomas started his engine, pulling back onto the road. If that person in his trunk is Terry or my daughter Savannah, I'm not letting go. Just be fast, detective. We'll stay safe. Thomas will be careful, Thomas said and ended the call. He pressed the accelerator, following the sheriff's taillights in the distance as darkness settled over the Texas landscape. Thomas kept Detective Rodriguez on speaker as they continued tailing the sheriff's SUV through the darkening Texas landscape. The detective's voice crackled through the phone, coordinating units while staying on the line with them. He's heading for the county line exit, Thomas reported. But even as he said it, the sheriff's brake lights flared and the SUV suddenly veered onto another road. He changed direction, Barry said urgently. He's not leaving town. Rodriguez's voice was grim. Someone at the station must have tipped him off about the bolo. Keep following, but maintain your distance. They drove for another 10 minutes through increasingly desolate terrain. The sheriff's vehicle finally slowed, turning onto a rough dirt road that led to what looked like an abandoned ranch property. Thomas could make out the silhouette of buildings against the darkening sky, a main house and several outbuildings, including what appeared to be old stables. Detective, he's pulled into an abandoned ranch, Thomas reported, giving the location. Looks like the old Hartley place. It's been empty for years. Units are en route, Rodriguez responded. Do not approach. I repeat, do not approach the buildings. Thomas pulled off the road about 200 yards from the ranch entrance, parking behind a stand of scrub brush. They watched as the sheriff's SUV stopped near one of the stable buildings. In the dim light, they could see Sheriff Ridge exit his vehicle and move to the trunk. The sheriff struggled with the weight of the person he pulled out. The bound figure was limp, either unconscious or too weak to resist. He half carried, half dragged them toward the stable's dark entrance. I need to get closer, Thomas said, reaching for his door handle. Barry grabbed his arm. No, this is as far as we go. You heard the detective. That could be my daughter in there. It could be, Barry said. Or it could be a trap. We wait for backup. His grip was firm. Please, Thomas, we've come this far. Don't do something that might get us all killed. Thomas's hands clenched into fists, but he stayed in the truck. The minutes stretched like hours as they watched the stable, seeing occasional movement of flashlight beams through the gaps in the walls. Then, like ghosts in the darkness, police vehicles appeared. No sirens, no lights, just shadows converging on the ranch. Officers emerged and quickly surrounded the buildings, their movements precise and coordinated. They're here, Barry breathed. Thomas and Barry stepped out of the truck and were immediately met by an officer who held up a hand. Stay back here, gentlemen, for your safety. From inside the stable came sounds that made Thomas's blood run cold, cries of distress, sounds of resistance, and a voice calling for help. The voice was female. Go, go, go. Someone shouted, and officers stormed the stable. The next few minutes were chaos shouts, the sound of a struggle, more officers calling for backup and medical support. Thomas found himself moving forward, despite the officer's warning. Barry right beside him. Sheriff Ridge was brought out in handcuffs, his face contorted with rage. When he spotted Thomas, his expression became venomous. "You'll regret this." "Walker," he snarled. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. You just signed your own." "Shut up," one of the officers said. Pushing him toward a patrol car, another officer emerged from the sheriff's SUV, holding up a phone. "Detective Rodriguez needs to see this," he called out. "The sheriff's messages. They're talking about moving the woman out of town and something about planting bones." Rodriguez himself arrived moments later, taking the phone and scrolling through it with increasing alarm. He looked at the sheriff. "You want to tell us who you've been conspiring with?" "These messages are pretty clear." The sheriff's jaw clenched shut, refusing to speak. Barry stepped forward. "We know where he met them earlier at that farmhouse. I'm not familiar with the exact roads, but Thomas pulled out his phone, opening the GPS app. "Here," he said, showing the detective the pinpointed location. "That's where we saw the transfer." Just then, officers emerged from the stable, supporting a woman between them. Even in the poor light, even after 9 years, Thomas knew. "Savannah," he breathed. She was thin, frighteningly so, her clothes dirty and torn. But she was alive. The arriving medical team immediately took over, guiding her toward the ambulance that had just pulled up, its lights painting the scene in alternating red and white. One of the officers checking the sheriff's phone suddenly looked up. "Detective, we just got an incoming message. Someone sent coordinates. Says that's where they're burying the bones." "Bingo," Rodriguez said grimly. He pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, I need multiple backup units and a tactical team. We're raiding what appears to be a drug trafficking operation." He looked at the sheriff's phone again. "The messages mentioned drug payments and monthly incentives, and I need another team at these coordinates to intercept suspects attempting to bury remains." Several officers prepared to leave for the raid. Barry approached them urgently. "I'm coming with you. If this is connected to the farmhouse, my brother might be there." "Sir, this is a tactical operation." "My brother is Officer Terry Granger," Barry insisted. "He might be with these people." The lead officer looked at Rodriguez, who nodded. "Everyone knows Terry. We'll identify him if he's there. But you can't come on the raid, Mr. Granger. It's too dangerous. We'll contact you immediately after it's secure." Barry's shoulders sagged. "I hope you don't find him there." "I hope he really is in Mexico." Thomas barely heard this exchange. He was already moving toward the ambulance where Savannah was being treated. She looked more stable now, and 4 in her arm, medics checking her vitals. When she saw him approaching, she tried to stand despite the medics' protests. She swayed, and Thomas rushed forward to catch her. Then she was in his arms, her face buried against his neck, her body shaking with sobs. "Dad," she whispered, her voice fragile. "Dad, I knew you'd find me. I knew you wouldn't give up." The medic spoke gently. "Sir, she's been under the influence of some kind of sedative, but it's wearing off. She's been through significant trauma and needs immediate hospital care." Rodriguez had followed Thomas and now stood nearby with his notebook ready. Savannah looked at him through tear-filled eyes. "The sheriff," she began, her voice breaking. He used me. They wanted to kill me at first, but he told them not to. He told them to keep me alive for his visits." Thomas felt rage building in his chest, but he kept his voice gentle. "Who are they, sweetheart?" "Drug traffickers. Miguel Salazar is their leader. They kept me at their farmhouse in a hidden bunker built into an old grain silo." She looked at Rodriguez. "The sheriff is corrupt. He's been helping them operate, covering for them, making investigations disappear. In exchange, they paid him every month. And they kept me alive. They called me the sheriff's toy." Rodriguez wrote quickly, his face grim. "We'll get them all, Miss Walker. Our teams are already moving on their locations." The medic interrupted gently. We really need to transport her now. Thomas looked at Barry, pulled his truck. Keys from his pocket, and tossed them over. Use it as long as you need. I'm going with her. Barry caught the keys, nodding his understanding. Thomas climbed into the ambulance beside his daughter, taking her hand as the medics continued their work. As the doors closed and they pulled away from the nightmare scene, he began explaining everything that had happened since that morning. Discovery of her truck, the sheriff's suspicious behavior, meeting Barry, and the chase that had led to her rescue. Savannah squeezed his hand weakly. I want to tell the police everything, she said. After they treat me, I want to help. Put him away forever. The emergency room at Alpine General Hospital was a blur of activity. Thomas watched helplessly as the medical team wheeled Savannah away for examination and treatment. He found himself in the waiting area, slumping into an uncomfortable plastic chair that had seen too many worried families. For the first time since seeing that police car arrive at his ranch that afternoon, Thomas had nothing to do but think. The rage that had been simmering beneath his forced calm began to boil over. 9 years. 9 years of his daughter's suffering. While that bastard sheriff had played the concerned lawman, pretending to investigate, pretending to care. The antiseptic hospital smell was suffocating. Thomas stood abruptly and headed for the exit, needing air. He pulled out the pack of cigarettes he kept in his jacket for emergencies. He'd quit years ago, but some habits died hard. He was just about to light one when a voice called out, "Mr. Walker." Thomas turned to see a doctor in surgical scrubs approaching. He quickly pocketed the cigarette. I'm Dr. Chun. I've been examining your daughter. How is she? The doctor's expression was carefully professional, but Thomas could see the anger beneath. Physically, she's malnourished and severely underweight. There's evidence of repeated physical abuse, old fractures that healed improperly, scarring consistent with restraints. He paused. She's also developed infections in her reproductive system, including an STI. There are respiratory issues as well, likely from prolonged exposure to chemicals. We understand she was kept in a silo where drugs were stored. Thomas felt his knees weaken. He reached for the wall to steady himself. She's stable now, Dr. Chun continued quickly. We've started treatment for the infections and begun nutritional therapy, but she need to remain hospitalized for the duration of her treatment, at least a week, possibly longer. Can I see her? Of course. We've moved her to room 314. She's been asking for you. Thomas followed the doctor through the maze of corridors. When they reached the room, Dr. Chun paused at the door. She's been through unimaginable trauma, Mr. Walker. Recovery will take time, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally as well. Thomas nodded, his throat too tight to speak. The doctor left, and Thomas entered the room. Savannah looked small in the hospital bed. An IV drip attached to her arm, monitors tracking her vital signs, but her eyes were alert. When she saw him, she tried to smile. Dad. He moved to her bedside, taking the chair close to her. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears starting to flow. I'm so sorry I didn't come home that night. No. Thomas took her hand gently, mindful of how fragile she seemed. Don't you dare apologize. I'm the one who's sorry. I went looking for you that night, saw you were gone. But I thought you'd just gone somewhere else. Maybe camping out or went to town. I never imagined someone would take you. His voice broke. If I'd called the police that night instead of waiting until morning. Stop. Savannah's grip on his hand tightened slightly. If anyone's to blame, it's Sheriff Ridge. He was supposed to protect people. Instead, he used his badge for evil. Her eyes hardened with a strength that surprised him. He's the monster here, Dad, not you. A knock at the door interrupted them. A young officer entered hesitantly. Sorry to disturb you. Detective Rodriguez sent me to take Miss Walker's statement when she's ready. Thomas stood, protective instinct flaring. With all due respect, officer, given what's happened with the sheriff and the sensitive nature of this case, I'd prefer to wait for Detective Rodriguez himself. The officer nodded, understanding. I'll let him know, sir. Hours passed. Thomas dozed fitfully in the chair beside Savannah's bed, waking every time she moved or made a sound. Finally, near midnight, Detective Rodriguez arrived, looking exhausted but determined. He was accompanied by another officer carrying recording equipment. "I'm sorry for the delay," Rodriguez said. "It's been a long night of arrests and interrogations." "I understand," Thomas said. Savannah pushed herself up slightly in the bed. "I want to tell you everything about that night." Rodriguez and the officers set up their equipment, and Savannah began her story, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "I was moving cattle that evening, like usual. I took the truck out around 8 p.m. with feed, heading to our far west grazing area. It was a clear night, good visibility. I was just about to start herding the cattle back to the truck when I saw lights in a dry arroyo near an old abandoned well pad." She paused, gathering herself. "It was a drug exchange. I could see men loading packages between vehicles. I'd never seen any of them before, but I knew I needed to get out of there. I ran for my truck, leaving the cattle. There wasn't time to herd them, but one of them saw me, Miguel Salazar. I tried to drive away, but he came after me in his pickup with all lights off, blackout mode. He rammed my truck from behind, forced me off the road. Before I could do anything, he dragged me from the cab. He zip-tied my hands and blindfolded me." Thomas's hands clenched into fists as she continued. "I heard him radio someone. He kept saying, 'Sheriff, we have a problem.' That's when I knew it was Sheriff Ridge. He arrived at the farmhouse where they'd taken me. I could hear them arguing about what to do. Miguel wanted to kill me and dump the truck somewhere deep in the desert, but the sheriff," her voice wavered, "he said he wanted me for himself, told them to keep me alive. Miguel argued that I was a liability, but the sheriff reminded him of all the times he'd covered for them, cleaned up their messes, diverted investigations. He said they owed him this, keeping me secure and alive for his entertainment, in addition to the money they already paid him." Detective Rodriguez's face was stone as he took notes. "They kept me in a hidden bunker built into a grain silo at the farmhouse. I heard them planning to bury my truck. The sheriff told them about an abandoned oil drilling site outside Terlingua. Said the hole was already there. They just needed to dump the truck and cover it." She looked at her father. "After that, everything became a blur. They moved me between different properties over the years. Kept me sedated most of the time. There was a woman, a nurse who worked for the cartel. She kept me alive, treated my injuries. They killed her last year when she showed too much compassion." "Jesus," Thomas muttered. Rodriguez looked up from his notes. "Miss Walker, your account matches what Miguel Salazar told us tonight. He confirmed they used heavy trucks to fill that oil well with desert sand, working through the night. The sheriff manipulated all the traffic camera footage to cover their tracks." Thomas found his voice. "What about Terry Granger? He worked traffic enforcement. Did he help the sheriff?" Rodriguez's expression grew even grimmer. "We found Terry at the farmhouse tonight. He's alive, but barely. Apparently, Terry had grown suspicious when the sheriff requested specific traffic footage and seemed intent on controlling the investigation. When Terry confronted him, the sheriff arranged for the cartel to take him. They faked his sudden departure to Mexico." "My God," Thomas breathed. "Terry's been forced to work in their drug production facility for 8 years. He has multiple whip scars, old and new. They mutilated his fingers and toes to ensure compliance." Rodriguez shook his head. "He's here in the hospital too. Different wing. His brother Barry is with him. Is he going to be okay? Physically, he'll recover. Mentally, that's another story." Rodriguez pulled out his phone, showing them photos. "There's one more thing. We intercepted Salazar's men tonight at another location. They were burying bones mixed with women's clothing and boots similar to what Savannah used to wear. Savannah gasped. They were going to fake my death. Our forensic expert confirmed the bones are from pigs. The femurs and ribs can closely resemble human remains when fragmented and decomposed. Common enough in Texas. The plan was to move you across the border tonight while creating false evidence to make us think you were dead. Close the case permanently. The weight of how close they'd come to losing everything settled over the room. After Rodriguez and his team left with Savannah's full statement, Thomas sat with his daughter until she drifted off to sleep, exhausted from reliving her ordeal. He was standing in the hallway, trying to process everything, when he saw a familiar figure approaching. Barry Granger looked as exhausted as Thomas felt, but there was relief in his eyes. "Thomas," Barry said, extending his hand. "I wanted to thank you. If we hadn't met at that bar, if you hadn't overheard the sheriff, I'd never have found Terry." Thomas shook his hand. "He's alive. That's what matters." Barry's voice was thick with emotion. 8 years of hell, but he's alive. They stood together in the quiet hospital corridor, two men bound by an unlikely series of events that had exposed a deep corruption and saved 2 lives. "Rodriguez told me everything," Barry continued. "About the pig bones, the plan too. Move your daughter tonight. We stopped it just in time." "We'll fight this," Thomas said firmly. "Make sure Ridge and every last one of them pays for what they've done." Barry nodded. Rodriguez mentioned they're bringing in state investigators to examine the entire police department, root out any other corruption. They stood in companionable silence, both processing the night's revelations. Sometimes evil wore a badge and hid behind authority. But tonight, 2 ordinary men refusing to give up had brought that evil into the light. "Thank you," Barry said again, "for not giving up. For following your instincts." Thomas looked back toward Savannah's room. A father doesn't give up on his daughter, and a brother doesn't give up on his brother. Barry smiled sadly. "No, they don't." In the end, that simple truth had been stronger than years of corruption and violence. Love and determination had prevailed where evil had seemed unassailable. It wasn't a perfect victory. The scars would last a lifetime. But Savannah was alive. Terry was free. And justice would finally be served. The 2 men shook hands once more, united in their resolve to see this through to the end, to ensure that no other family would suffer as theirs had. If this story touched your heart, don't let it fade into silence. Every missing person is more than a name, they're a life, a memory, a voice that still matters. If you believe stories like this should never be forgotten, please like, share, and subscribe to help keep their memory alive. Together, we honor the lost. Together, we give silence a voice. Because remembering isn't just love, it's justice.